So we're going to open the floor to questions, but is there anything you'd like to say first?
I think we have just probably about enough time for questions, so let's go there.
Right there, please.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Oh, yeah. Awesome. Very cool. Great violinist.
Second of all, how did you keep up with broken strings, any problems with your instrument on the Camino? I can't imagine there being luthiers in every town.
No, there weren't.
Can I ask you, did everybody hear the question? Okay, so if you could repeat the question.
The question was, how did I deal with things like broken strings and problems with my instrument along the way? And it's a good question. I have a funny story about that. Like most of the things that we kind of figured out along the way there, I had to figure out a few things with my instrument along the way. And one day we started walking and it was kind of cool out. And then throughout the day, it got warmer and I got to where I was going, and I guess the case and the air inside the case had warmed up, but the cello hadn't. So all this water had condensed on the cello and it was just soaking wet. And I thought, and we weren't even that far into the journey at that point. So I thought, boy, this could be a real problem. So I dried it off and it was a little soggy, but it dried out and it was okay. So from then on, I solved that problem by stuffing the cello case with infant diapers. So the silicone beads would absorb the moisture. But anyway, you should find ways to figure it out, and that's what we did.
Anyone else with a question? See anybody? Yes, right here, please.
I don't know if you heard Oliver Schroer actually also did a piece on the Camino, and he played violin.
Right, I had heard of him. He was a Canadian folk violinist, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I had heard of him.
He didn't do a film, but he did.
He made a CD,
Yes.
which I think somebody gave me that CD of Oliver Schroer right at the beginning of this idea. Yeah, I was aware of him. Yeah.
I'm still waiting for a concert pianist to do it.
Right.
I think it's a question here.
Thank you.
Oh, that's a good question. So one of the big parts of preparing for this journey was, the question was, how did we get permission for me to play music and to record and film in all of the churches along the way? And that's a good question. It was actually a big headache that came up rather late in the preparation process. I just, on a whim, emailed a cellist who lived in Pamplona and taught at the conservatory there, and I said, I'm doing this project, and I'd love to meet you on the way through, and if you have some cello students that you think would be interested in this project, we're going to have a recording session there, and they could, it would be nice to see them there. Anyway, so he wrote back to me, he said, well, how are you doing this? Because, you have to have permission to play in all these churches. And I thought, yeah, okay. This is pretty typical for me, So I kind of somehow got this guy, Diego Arbizu, the guy that I'd emailed out of the blue. Somehow, within another email, he had offered to help me with that. And I think he bit off more than he could chew, because he quit eventually. We did convince him to come back on the team, but the team grew to 3 or 4 people who were working on this problem of communicating with 36 different priests at all these churches and getting permission from every single one of them. And eventually the way we got permission from all of them was to say, okay, we'd like to do a recording session, but after the recording session, we'll do a free concert for the community. Anybody can come. And that, we got yeses from 36 churches doing that. So I did go over there thinking, okay, I'll be playing concerts, but I also kind of thought that I'd get to do a recording. And oftentimes what happens is we showed up for the recording session and there'd already be an audience there. So we had to forget about that. Anyway, it was that's kind of how that evolved. And it was probably the biggest part of the preparation, actually the most difficult, was getting permission to do that. Yeah.
But once we got in, we just destroy the places.
Yeah.
I mean, no holds barred.
Tristan, I have a question for you. You said you had 10 people with you?
Yeah, I think, well, 9, and then at one point we had 10.
So what was that like for you going alongside, walking also?
Well, I only was able to walk about half of the Camino, is my estimate. I never have actually counted it up. In order to actually direct the thing, I couldn't actually be on the Camino all the time because it was really limiting to walk 30 kilometers and then get to the end and you're just zapped. On the days that I did walk, it was almost like I felt like I got no work done that day. We had a production vehicle that was taking us, that would essentially start in the town that everyone would wake up in. There would be a crew on the path, and then I was sort of handling a B unit a lot of times, getting people coming off the Camino so that we could interview them pretty much fresh off. Or they would say, "Oh, let me just collect my thoughts." I couldn't walk the whole thing. It wouldn't logistically have made sense. So,
but I think everybody
sadly,
on the crew got a chance to walk enough of it so that they had a real connection to that part of the experience and a real sense that that they were part of that experience. I guess I was the only one who walked the whole thing, but I'll make an admission that there was one day when I was that lady in the taxi cab. But I think my defense, it was like pouring rain, and I was, drenched.
No defense.
I also like to remind Dane that a camera and a tripod weighs a lot more than a cello.
It's true. I admit that.
Just because.
Other
Anybody?
questions? There, please.
We'll go middle first, and then we'll get you second.
For each of you, what was your takeaway from this, from walking and coming into Santiago? Like, what was your takeaway?
My
That's a
takeaway
very
was the
big
film.
question.
I mean, my takeaway, if my takeaway is not clear here, then maybe I haven't done my job. But yeah, that was it for me. Was many of the ideas that are encapsulated in here. That it's, there is no kind of Hollywood ending to this thing, and for the people who do the walk, if you go in there with mental instability, if you go in there and you're not right within, this thing's not going to fix it for you. That was my takeaway.
Yeah, I think, for me, my takeaway from the Camino was rather larger than just the Camino itself, because the journey really began when I started thinking about this crazy idea. And then through the production of it, and then through the walk, and then through the post-production to like right now, it's been a really interesting journey. And I would say, I had a lot of takeaways, but I think the most important thing that I learned from a production side was that my idea became so much better and so much more beautiful when I included input from really brilliant people that I could surround myself with, and when I allowed those, other people to take ownership of that project in a certain way. And so, I think there's a good lesson there in that I think probably a lot of people take from the Camino as well, that, you might have your own ideas about how something's supposed to go, but you let the world around you and people around you influence you, and life becomes much richer and much more beautiful as a result.
Is there a question here, please?
Did you have any thoughts of going back?
Did we have any thoughts of going back to walk? I think I certainly would do it, but it's not at the top of my list.
I would do it again, but there are many routes from all over Europe that converge on this path, and there are actually several routes through Spain. So I might consider doing it again sometime, but I would take a different route, I think.
Asking because we walked El Camino last year.
Oh, okay.
Oh, you walked the last 100 kilometers?
We walked 200 K from Rosaria
Okay.
Oh, okay.
And this year we went back
Oh.
You did it again.
another 200K. And
Do they give you a second Compostela certificate?
yes,
They do.
yes.
Oh.
So does that get you out of purgatory twice?
I think it does. I think it does.
Is that like just in case it's a
Well,
backup?
That's something that a lot of people do, I guess, is they'll do it in sections, because not everybody is fortunate enough to have 6 weeks to just go and walk across Spain. So,
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
How did you find it in terms of like traffic and people and just like was it a nice walk or was it just scary going from one or is it like trying to walk through the city all the time?
okay, so the question was, how did we find the crowds and the congestion, or the experience with the number of other people that were there? Personally, I feel like the experience was very varied day to day. Some days you'd be walking in what seemed like a herd of people, and then some days you wouldn't see anyone else really. So it was pretty varied, and you could kind of seek out the experience you were looking for. If you left with the crowd, you were probably going to walk in a crowd, and if you left earlier or later, then you had a little more privacy. So it was really kind of up to you, I found, and there was a bit in the film where a young woman was talking about a supposed race for beds at the next rest stop, and I don't think we ever had problems with that. Although eventually we achieved some kind of celebrity status along the Camino. So we'd get to a town with our film crew and find that somebody had actually already reserved spots for us. So that was really nice. Maybe we lucked out in that way. But we didn't really struggle with the crowds. I think there are a couple 100,000 people that walk every year now. It's gotten really popular, and so and I think during the peak season it can be kind of crowded, but not too bad.
For context, the woman with the previous question, she said she started in Sarria, which is 100 kilometers from Santiago, and in order to get the certificate, which is sort of traditionally the religious reason why you would walk it, you have to do 100 kilometers, and so typically people will start at that 100 kilometer mark. Most people. So once you get to that 100 kilometer mark, you suddenly see school groups, kids on their field trips. That's when it starts to get
To change a bit.
pretty crowded.
And actually,
Soda machines on the side of the Camino. Or is it pop machines?
as an extension to that thought, I think my favorite part of the Camino was actually from Santiago to Finisterre, because it was so different. There were so many fewer people doing that part of the walk that it really was very nice. And my dad actually came and joined me in Santiago and walked those kilometers to the ocean. Which I don't know if he regrets it or not. He was in a lot of pain, but it was a nice part of the trip.
Right here?
That's a follow-up question about that filming. There's a lot of imagery of walking, but power lines and traffic and overpasses, almost the worst parts. Was there a logistical reason that you could film beside the road, or was that something you guys did because that was an important part of the walk?
To me, that was a really important part of it, and actually, it wasn't so much about characterizing those bits as the bad parts, but the modern parts, the things that look, the idea of a pilgrimage is sort of an old idea, and what does that mean today? What is that today? Now, a lot of those images, I also take with a double meaning. I mean, the power lines to me, it's a transient image. There's an energy flowing through it. A lot of those things they're in there for a reason,
sort of a modern
and not just for the modern aspect of it. I find that there's beauty in everything. So,
and we really wanted, there's been a couple films now before this one about the Camino de Santiago, and they generally, from what we saw, presented one side of the Camino. They presented sort of the picturesque, photogenic side, and we wanted to really show the 30% of the Camino that's not so photogenic, and it is about that much of it. So it's a fairly sizable chunk that's not it's no longer pristine. So we wanted to represent that fairly.
There's a question right behind. Yes, sir.
How did your legs and your feet hold out? And in terms of the development around the trail, is it preserved at all at this point, or is there more sort of cosmopolitan pressure, or you just develop around the trail?
So the question was two parts. The first was a question about legs and feet holding up under that kind of mileage. And the second part was, I'll answer that first. My feet and legs were in a lot of pain for 40 days. So it just, but they healed up just fine. And I will say that I think they were stronger than they've ever been. So, but there was a significant amount of pain. The second part of the question was, is there pressure or societal pressure to sort of further develop the land around the Camino? And I think that's an interesting observation, and it's true that in many of these towns actually exist now because of the Camino. The man in the film talking about his village that has 4 annual residents. And a lot of these towns were like that, basically abandoned except for maybe a general store and a cafe. And these people were just eking a very meager living out of this seasonal tourist attraction. And I think from what I understand, this is sort of further destroying the mythology around the Camino, but the route was actually chosen so that the route would hit certain points along the way. The path that we follow in modern days is not necessarily the path that was traditionally followed. It's an approximation, but they decided, well, we've got to hit these spots along the way, and I think cities were actually bidding to be on that route. So it does influence that area considerably.
Right there, please.
How did this trip change how you play Bach? And are there other composers you would like to play with if you go back?
I think it changed the way that I think about music in general, because I don't think that I'll ever have such a focused experience of performing one composer's music ever again in my life. To play 36 concerts in 40 days of the same composer's music, it really brought me close to that. I chose the Bach cello suites because they've been in my life for, since basically the beginning of my time with the cello. And they're really foundational to the repertoire. So it just felt like if I was going to deepen my connection to something, I would choose Bach, and it's also some of my favorite music. So, and I think it did really change the way that I play Bach. That's how I experience it. When I hear myself play in the film, I like what I hear, but I also kind of feel like some of the tempos are strange, and some of the free. It sometimes feels a little bit restrained to me. So it keeps evolving, and I don't expect that will stop until I stop playing the cello. So that's sort of also maybe something to take that I took from the experience and from the project.
I think we'll take one more question. Yes, sir.
I noticed that some of the hardest parts of the Camino were not shown, like the Dane Johansen and the Pyrenees and a couple of other spots. Would that be, but for spectacular photography and cinematography? Was that logistical?
It was a combination of things.
What was the question?
Oh, sorry. The question was some of the more difficult segments of the Camino were not shown, and why? And was it a logistical reason? It was actually a combination of things. Partially logistical, partially because I just remember a long time ago, someone told me, a mentor of mine told me, whatever you do in your career, don't make a walking film. Meaning a film where it's just character walks from point A to point B, then we see him walk from point B to point C, you know, and it's just, and obviously in this film, how do you not show some of that stuff? But I didn't want to belabor it too much. And then the third part of this was that, yeah, we actually were a day behind schedule. So we started in the middle of the Pyrenees rather than that very first leg. For people who've done that before, that's like the serious bit, is like day one is the serious bit.
That's kind of a fun story, actually. The reason we were a day behind schedule, we got there and we were immediately beset with this really serious problem, in that the audio processor that we'd brought with us to record all this music had been detained by Spanish customs, and they were only going to let us have it if we paid them 5,000 euros cash. And of course, they said that we'd get that money back, but we weren't that foolish. So we actually had them ship the processor back to Switzerland, where it came from, and one of our crew members flew there to pick it up and flew back with it in, unpacked in a backpack. And that's how we got our processor to Spain. But that's why we were one day behind schedule.
And then we put it to good use.
Right.
Well, I'd like to thank you very much.
Thank you.
And especially for bringing your world premiere here. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you, everyone. Don't forget the comment cards.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.